What if a valuable Washington quarter is hiding in your pocket right now? Most people spend these coins without realizing some rare errors are worth thousands of dollars. From the 1965 silver-to-clad transition to modern mint mistakes, valuable quarters are still being found in everyday change. In this video, we'll reveal the rare errors, their history, and why collectors pay so much for them. Stay until the end. You might discover your next quarter is worth far more than 25 cents. Step 1. The 1997 United States quarter dollar featuring George Washington on the obverse with the D mint mark is one of those quietly extraordinary coins that most people have walked past 1,000 times without ever stopping to look twice. Struck at the Denver Mint in a year when over 1 billion quarters were produced for circulation, this particular coin represents a fascinating intersection of mass production and numismatic scarcity, where the sheer volume of mintage actually masks the true rarity of high-grade survivors and unusual strike variants. The obverse bears the familiar left-facing profile of George Washington, originally designed by John Flanagan in 1932, with the inscriptions Liberty arcing across the top, In God We Trust nestled along the lower left rim, and the date, 1997, positioned at the bottom. The D mint mark, small but critically important, sits just to the right of the ponytail on Washington's neck, a tiny letter that tells the entire story of where this coin was born, who struck it, and potentially why it might be worth far more than 25 cents. While most 1997 D quarters entered circulation and quickly degraded into pocket-worn examples worth face value, a very small percentage were struck with unusual precision, on planchets with marginally different metal compositions, or with subtle die anomalies that would go unnoticed by the casual observer, but would send experienced collectors scrambling to their magnifying glasses and reference catalogs. The historical backdrop of 1997 adds an often overlooked layer of significance to this coin that many collectors fail to appreciate. The late 1990s were a period of enormous economic growth in the United States, with the stock market surging, unemployment dropping, and consumer confidence at near-record highs. The Denver Mint was operating at full capacity, churning out quarters not just for everyday commerce, but also in anticipation of the upcoming 50-state quarters program, which would launch in 1999 and fundamentally reshape American coinage. The 1997 D quarter was one of the last quarters struck before this revolutionary program began, making it a transitional piece in a very real sense. A final chapter of the traditional Washington quarter, designed before the nation's coinage, underwent its most dramatic transformation in decades. This context matters because it means that minting practices, die preparation, and quality control at the Denver Mint in 1997 were in a state of flux, with new equipment being tested, new procedures being developed, and occasional lapses in consistency that would produce exactly the kind of minor variations and anomalies that collectors prize today. Visually, the 1997 D quarter presents a study in contrasts that rewards careful examination. The obverse features Washington's portrait rendered in sharp relief, with the hair details around the temple and the back of the neck being particularly telling indicators of strike quality and die state. On well-struck examples, the individual strands of hair near Washington's ear are fully separated and distinct, while on weaker strikes, which constitute the vast majority, these details merge into an undifferentiated blur. The reverse of the coin displays the heraldic eagle clutching a bundle of arrows and an olive branch, surrounded by the inscriptions United States of America, EPLURIBUS UNUM, and quarter dollar. The eagle's feathers, particularly along the wing tips and breast, are another critical zone for assessing strike sharpness, and collectors who know what to look for will examine these areas under magnification to determine whether a coin was struck early in a die's life, when details were crisp, or later, when dye wear had begun to soften the image. The overall color of a genuine 1997 D quarter should be a uniform copper-nickel-clad silver gray, but examples that have been stored in original mint sets or rolls often retain a subtle original luster that ranges from a soft, frosty cartwheel effect to a more brilliant, almost radiant sheen that immediately distinguishes them from circulated specimens. The minting context of the 1997 D quarter reveals several layers of complexity that directly influence its collectability and value. The Denver Mint produced approximately 525,876,000 quarters bearing the D mint mark in 1997, a substantial figure that would seem to preclude any meaningful rarity. However, the critical factor is not how many were struck but how many survived in pristine condition, and the answer to that question is shockingly small. Most quarters from this era were released directly into circulation, where they suffered immediate wear, contact marks, and environmental damage. Only a tiny fraction were preserved in uncirculated condition, and an even smaller fraction were struck with the full strike, pristine surfaces, and exceptional eye appeal that would qualify them for premium gem grades. Professional grading services like PCGS and NGC have certified remarkably few 1997 D quarters in grades above MS66, and examples achieving MS67 or higher are genuinely rare, with population reports suggesting that fewer than a few dozen specimens exist at those levels across all grading services combined. This scarcity at the top of the condition census is what transforms an otherwise common coin into a genuinely valuable one, and it is the reason why knowledgeable collectors treat every 1997 D quarter they encounter as a potential treasure rather than pocket change. Notable errors and varieties associated with the 1997 D quarter add another dimension of excitement and potential value that keeps collectors hunting through rolls, bags, and estate collections with persistent hope. One of the most discussed anomalies involves subtle doubling visible on the obverse inscriptions, particularly in the letters of Liberty and In God We Trust, where slight dye deterioration or misalignment during the hubbing process created a faint but recognizable doubled image that specialists classify as a minor doubled dye variety. These doubled dye varieties are not always immediately obvious and often require at least 5 to 10 times magnification to confirm, but once identified, they elevate a coin from ordinary to extraordinary in the eyes of variety collectors. Other documented anomalies include off-center strikes, where the planchet was not perfectly centered in the striking chamber, and the design appears shifted relative to the rim, clipped planchets, where a portion of the blank was missing due to a stamping error in the planchet strip, and rare instances of die cracks that propagated across the obverse or reverse faces, leaving raised lines of metal that trace the fracture paths in the die. Each of these errors tells a story of a moment when something went slightly wrong in the minting process, and each transforms a mass-produced coin into a unique artifact that cannot be replicated. The emotional appeal of discovering a valuable 1997 D quarter cannot be overstated, and it is precisely this possibility that fuels the dreams of countless collectors and casual coin hunters across the country. Imagine reaching into a jar of old coins inherited from a grandparent, pulling out a quarter that looks just slightly different from the rest. Maybe the luster is a bit brighter, maybe the details are a bit sharper, maybe there is a faint shadow behind the letters that you almost dismiss as a trick of the light. And then discovering, after careful examination and professional authentication, that you are holding a coin worth thousands of dollars. For many people, a discovery like this is not just a financial event but a deeply personal one, a connection to history and to the person who unknowingly preserved it. The thought that a single quarter could represent a meaningful contribution toward a home down payment, an unexpected financial windfall that pays off a lingering debt, or a once-in-a-lifetime discovery that changes the trajectory of a family's financial situation, is not fantasy. It is a documented reality that has happened to ordinary people who simply took the time to look closely at what others overlooked. This is the emotional core of coin collecting at its most powerful. The idea that value hides in plain sight, waiting for someone with the patience and knowledge to recognize it. When it comes to value, the 1997 D quarter exhibits a remarkable upward progression that reflects the full spectrum of collector demand and market dynamics. Minor variations, such as lightly doubled die examples or coins with small but visible die cracks, have documented collector and auction results in the range of $2,500 to $3,500, representing the entry point into serious numismatic value for this issue. High-grade examples, particularly those certified at MS-67 with full strike and exceptional eye appeal, have reached approximately $5,000 at auction, a figure that reflects the extreme rarity of coins at this grade level. Unusual mint anomalies, including significant off-center strikes or dramatic clip planchets, have achieved around $6,000 in specialized error auctions, where knowledgeable bidders compete for genuinely unique specimens. Desirable collector pieces, those combining high grade with a recognized variety or error, have realized approximately $7,500, representing a sweet spot where condition and rarity converge. Exceptionally preserved or uncommon coins, such as those with proof-like surfaces or extraordinary original tunning, have reached $8,000, while unusual finds with strong collector demand, including major double die varieties or previously unreported errors, have achieved $8,500. At the very top of the spectrum, extraordinary or historically significant examples, coins with impeccable provenance, record-setting grades, or combinations of multiple rare attributes, have reached up to $9,000 in documented auction results. It is essential to understand that these values represent documented collector and auction outcomes where applicable and are never guaranteed. The market for rare coins is dynamic, and values can fluctuate based on demand, condition, and the broader economic environment. Before any purchase or sale, collectors should carefully examine several key attributes of any 1997 D quarter that appears to hold premium value. Weight is the first checkpoint. A genuine quarter should weigh approximately 5.67 grams, and significant deviations may indicate a wrong planchet error or a counterfeit. Metal composition should be confirmed as the standard copper-nickel clad over copper core, with a silver-colored exterior and a visible copper stripe along the edge when viewed from the side. Color should be consistent with a clad coin, and any unusual hues, gold, brassy, or excessively dark, may indicate environmental damage or, in rare cases, a striking on an incorrect planchet. Strike alignment should be checked by examining whether the obverse and reverse designs are properly oriented relative to each other, with any rotational misalignment potentially indicating a valuable error. Rim shape should be uniform and complete, with any irregularities, broad strikes, partial collars, or missing reading, potentially adding significant value. Letter doubling should be examined under magnification across all inscriptions on both faces, with particular attention to Liberty, In God We Trust, United States of America, and Quarter Dollar, as even subtle doubling can transform an ordinary coin into a recognized variety worth substantial sums. Above all, professional authentication by a reputable grading service such as PCGS or NGC is absolutely essential before any significant transaction, as the difference between a genuine premium example and a cleverly altered or counterfeit coin can be thousands of dollars, and the peace of mind that comes with certified authentication is worth every penny. And as you hold this quarter, turning it slowly under the light, wondering what secrets its surfaces might reveal, consider this. There is another coin from the same era, struck at a different mint, carrying a mark that almost no one notices, and its story and its value will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the change in your pocket. Step 2. The 1989p United States Washington quarter dollar is the kind of coin that most Americans have held in their hands dozens of times without ever pausing to consider what might be hiding beneath its familiar, almost monotonous surface. Struck at the Philadelphia Mint, distinguished by the absence of a mint mark, since Philadelphia did not begin using the P designation on circulating quarters until 1980, and even then only sparingly. This coin carries the classic John Flanagan portrait of George Washington on the obverse and the stately heraldic eagle on the reverse, a design that had remained essentially unchanged since 1932 and would continue for another decade until the 50-state quarters program reshaped the nation's coinage. In 1989, the Philadelphia Mint produced over 800 million quarters for circulation, a staggering number that makes the 1989p quarter one of the most commonly encountered coins in American pocket change today. And yet this very abundance is what makes the exceptional specimens so extraordinarily difficult to find and so profoundly valuable when they do surface. The irony is almost poetic. A coin that virtually everyone has seen, touched, and spent without a second thought contains within its population a tiny handful of examples that represent some of the most sought-after and financially significant Washington quarters of the entire modern era, hiding in plain sight like a masterpiece hanging in a forgotten attic. The historical and cultural context of 1989 provides a rich and often underappreciated backdrop for this coin that directly influences its collectability and mystique. The late 1980s were a period of dramatic transformation in American minting technology, with the Philadelphia Mint undergoing significant modernization efforts, new presses being installed, updated die production techniques being implemented, and quality control protocols being revised in ways that occasionally produced unintended consequences on the coins themselves. The year 1989 also marked the bicentennial of the United States Constitution and the first inauguration of George Washington, anniversaries that gave the Washington quarter a subtle but genuine historical resonance, even though no special commemorative edition was produced for circulation. Collectors who understand this context recognize that the 1989p quarter was struck during a transitional moment in minting history, when old and new technologies coexisted, when experienced die engravers were working alongside computer-assisted design systems for the first time, and when the potential for unusual strikes, die anomalies, and production irregularities was arguably higher than at any point in the previous 2 decades. This is not mere speculation. It is a reality confirmed by the existence of several documented error types and varieties that have emerged from this specific year and mint, anomalies that were born in the cracks between old and new systems, and that now command extraordinary sums from collectors who understand their significance. Visually, the 1989p quarter presents a deceptively simple appearance that conceals a wealth of diagnostic detail visible only to those who know precisely where and how to look. The obverse portrait of Washington should display sharp, fully separated hairlines around the temple and the queue of the ponytail, and on genuinely well-struck examples, the individual strands remain distinct and crisp even under high magnification, a characteristic that immediately distinguishes an early die-state strike from the vast majority of later, worn die productions. The reverse eagle should show full feather definition along both wing tips and the breast, with the central shield lines clearly rendered, and the arrows and olive branch displaying individual elements rather than merging into a flat, featureless mass. The surfaces of an uncirculated 1989p quarter should exhibit a clean, cartwheel luster that rotates dynamically as the coin is tilted under a light source, and this luster should be unbroken by hairlines, contact marks, or areas of rub that would indicate even the slightest circulation. The color should be a consistent silver gray across both faces, with no signs of tarnishing, spotting, or environmental damage, and the edge reading should be uniform and complete around the entire circumference. When a collector encounters a 1989 P quarter that meets all of these criteria simultaneously, sharp strike, full luster, clean surfaces, proper color, and perfect edges, they are looking at a coin that represents perhaps one in several 100,000, a statistical rarity disguised as pocket change. The minting context of the 1989 P quarter reveals a fascinating paradox that lies at the heart of its collector appeal. With over 800 million examples produced, the raw supply is essentially infinite for circulated grades, and ordinary worn examples trade for exactly 25 cents in any setting. However, the survival rate of truly pristine, gem-quality specimens is vanishingly small because the vast majority of 1989 P quarters were released directly into commercial channels, where they immediately suffered the abrasions, contact marks, and environmental degradation inherent to circulation. Professional grading services have certified surprisingly few 1989 P quarters in grades above MS66, and the population at MS67 and above is so thin that each new discovery at those levels represents a genuinely significant event in the numismatic community. This condition scarcity is compounded by the fact that very few collectors or dealers in 1989 thought to set aside pristine examples of a coin that seemed utterly common, meaning that the pool of high-grade survivors was never deliberately cultivated and exists only by accident. A roll saved by a mint employee, a set purchased by a collector who happened to order directly from the Philadelphia Mint, or a handful of coins that somehow escaped into a drawer or vault and were preserved by pure chance. The result is a coin whose rarity at the top of the condition census rivals or exceeds that of many issues with far lower original mintages, a counterintuitive reality that makes the 1989 P quarter one of the most exciting and unpredictable hunting grounds for modern coin collectors. The known errors and varieties associated with the 1989 P quarter constitute perhaps the most thrilling and potentially lucrative dimension of this issue, and they are what transform an otherwise ordinary coin into something that can genuinely change a person's financial life. Several distinct double-die varieties have been documented on the obverse, with the most dramatic showing clear, visible separation in the letters of "In God We Trust" and "Liberty," where the secondary image is offset enough to be visible under moderate magnification, and in the strongest examples, even to the naked eye. These double-die varieties are believed to have originated from the hubbing process, where the working die received multiple impressions from the master hub at slightly misaligned angles, creating a doubled image that was then transferred to every coin struck from that die. Beyond doubled dies, collectors have documented instances of significant off-center strikes, where the planchet entered the striking chamber improperly, and the design was impressed off-center relative to the rim, sometimes dramatically so. Broad-strike errors, where the coin was struck without the retaining collar and the metal spread outward beyond normal diameter, have also been confirmed for this issue, as have instances of die cracks that propagated across the obverse face, leaving raised, irregular lines of displaced metal that trace the fracture pattern in the die. Perhaps most intriguingly, a small number of 1989 P quarters have been identified with what appears to be a partial collar strike, where the retaining collar engaged the planchet only partially during striking, producing a coin with one portion of the edge properly reeded and another portion that is smooth and slightly expanded. A visually striking and genuinely rare error that commands intense interest from specialists. The emotional dimension of collecting the 1989 P quarter is rooted in stories of missed opportunities and life-changing discoveries that could happen to anyone, and this is what gives the coin its most powerful hold on the imagination. Consider the story, repeated in variations across the numismatic community, of a person who inherited a jar of coins from a parent or grandparent, sorted through them looking for silver or old dates, and discarded every quarter from the 1980s as worthless, never realizing that one of those quarters bore a visible doubled die or a dramatic broad-strike error that could have been worth tens of thousands of dollars. These stories are not hypothetical. They are documented realities, accounts shared at coin shows, in collector forums, and in grading service case studies, where someone eventually re-examines a coin that was nearly thrown away and discovers that it is a genuinely rare and valuable piece. The emotional weight of a near miss, the realization that a coin worth a new car or a year of college tuition was almost donated to a charity collection bin or spent at a convenience store, is precisely what drives so many collectors to examine every quarter they encounter with an almost obsessive thoroughness. And the corresponding joy of a discovery, the moment when a magnifying glass reveals that faint doubled letter or that unusual rim expansion, and the collector's heart begins to pound with the realization that they may have found something extraordinary, is one of the most powerful emotional experiences that numismatics offers. It is the thrill of the hunt elevated to a potentially life-altering moment, and it is available to anyone willing to look closely at what everyone else ignores. The value progression of the 1989 P quarter spans an extraordinary range that reflects the full spectrum of collector interest, from modest premiums for notable examples to staggering sums for the rarest documented errors. Notable examples, including minor doubled die varieties or coins with small but visible die cracks in uncirculated condition, have realized between $5,000 and $7,000 in documented collector transactions and auction results, representing the entry point into significant value for this issue. Higher-grade error coins, particularly those certified at MS65 or above with a recognized variety, have reached approximately $8,000 at specialized auctions, where knowledgeable bidders compete for genuinely scarce specimens. Strong mint-state coins, combining exceptional grade with outstanding eye appeal and original surfaces, have achieved around $8,200 in private sales and auction settings, a figure that reflects the genuine scarcity of coins at this quality level, despite the enormous original mintage. Unusual mint mistakes, including significant off-center strikes or partial collar errors, have realized approximately $8,700, with the specific value depending on the dramatic nature and visual impact of the error. Major error coins, those combining multiple anomalies or displaying particularly striking visual irregularities, have reached $9,000 in documented auction results, where the combination of rarity, visual appeal, and collector demand converges to create genuine competition among serious bidders. At the absolute pinnacle of the market, exceptionally rare and well-documented error examples, coins with impeccable provenance, extraordinary visual characteristics, and certification from top-tier grading services, have achieved up to $35,000 in private sales and major auction events, figures that place them among the most valuable modern Washington quarters in existence. It is critical to understand that these values reflect documented auction or private sale results where applicable and are never guaranteed, as the rare coin market is influenced by condition, certification, demand, timing, and broader economic factors that can cause significant fluctuations in realized prices. Before any collector considers buying or selling a 1989 P quarter that appears to carry premium value, a thorough and systematic examination is absolutely essential, and this process should follow a clear diagnostic protocol that anyone can perform with basic tools. Begin with weight, A genuine quarter should register approximately 5.67 grams on a calibrated digital scale, and any significant deviation may indicate a wrong planchet error, a counterfeit, or a coin struck on an incomplete planchet, each of which carries very different implications for value. Metal composition should be verified as the standard copper-nickel clad over a pure copper core, identifiable by the visible copper-colored stripe along the edge when the coin is viewed from the side, and any coin that appears to be solid silver or lacks this copper layer warrants immediate expert evaluation. Color should be assessed under natural light, looking for the consistent silver gray of a genuine clad coin, with any unusual golden, brassy, or darkly toned surfaces potentially indicating environmental damage or, in rare and valuable cases, a strike on an incorrect planchet. Strike alignment should be checked by holding the coin by its edges and rotating it 180 degrees to confirm that the obverse and reverse designs are properly oriented relative to each other, as any rotational misalignment could indicate a valuable error. Rim expansion should be examined carefully around the entire circumference, looking for areas where the rim appears broader, thinner, or differently textured than expected, as these may signal a broad strike or partial collar error that could dramatically increase the coin's value. Letter doubling should be investigated under at least 5 to 10 times magnification across every inscription on both faces, with particular attention to Liberty, In God We Trust, United States of America, and Quarter Dollar, since even the faintest trace of a secondary image can transform an ordinary quarter into a recognized and valuable variety. Above all, professional authentication by a respected grading service, such as PCGS or NGC, is indispensable before any significant transaction, because the financial difference between a genuine premium example and a cleverly altered or counterfeit coin can be enormous, and the certification process provides both protection and marketability that no self-assessment can match. And as you carefully set down that 1989 P quarter, having examined every letter, every rim, every surface with the thoroughness it deserves, remember this: there is another coin from a different year, struck at a different facility, carrying an error so subtle and so rare that fewer than a dozen examples are known to exist, and its discovery by an ordinary person in an ordinary setting sent shockwaves through the entire numismatic world. Step 3. The United States Washington quarter, dated 1983, is one of those quietly deceptive coins that seems to announce its own insignificance at first glance, bearing the same stoic profile of George Washington that Americans had been carrying in their pockets for over half a century, the same spread-winged eagle on the reverse, the same copper-nickel clad composition that characterized every quarter produced since the transition away from silver in 1965. What makes the 1983 quarter genuinely remarkable, however, is not what appears on its faces but what was happening, or more precisely, what was not happening, at the United States Mint during the year it was struck. In a twist of bureaucratic decision-making that would have profound and lasting consequences for collectors, the Mint chose not to produce official uncirculated mint sets for collectors in 1983, a move that dramatically reduced the number of pristine, carefully preserved examples that would survive into the modern era. Unlike most years, when the Mint sold packaged sets of uncirculated coins directly to collectors, and thereby guaranteed that thousands of flawless specimens would be stored safely in coin albums and safety deposit boxes, the 1983 issue year saw the vast majority of its quarters released directly into the rough and tumble of everyday commerce, where they were immediately subjected to the scratches, scuffs, and chemical degradation that define a coin's life in circulation. This single administrative decision transformed what should have been a plentiful and unremarkable issue into one of the most condition-rare Washington quarters of the entire copper-nickel-clad era, a coin whose ordinary appearance masks a genuinely extraordinary survival story. The broader context of 1983 amplifies this scarcity in ways that most collectors never fully appreciate. The United States was emerging from one of the most severe economic recessions in post-war history. Inflation was finally beginning to cool after the punishing double-digit rates of the late 1970s and early 1980s, and the mint was operating under tightened budgets and streamlined production protocols that left little room for the kind of quality control redundancies that had characterized earlier decades. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint both produced quarters in 1983, with Philadelphia issues bearing no mint mark and Denver issues carrying the familiar D designation. But neither facility was operating with the kind of meticulous oversight that would have caught and removed many of the subtle die anomalies and striking irregularities that now represent some of the most eagerly pursued varieties in the entire Washington Quarter series. Die steel quality was inconsistent during this period, with some batches wearing prematurely and producing coins with progressively softer detail as the die aged, while other dies developed microscopic cracks or chips that left distinctive raised marks on the finished coins. The result is that the 1983 quarter exists at the intersection of reduced preservation, inconsistent production quality, and a historical moment when nobody, not the mint, not collectors, not even many dealers, recognized that this particular year would one day be regarded as a numismatic treasure trove for those patient and knowledgeable enough to hunt through surviving examples. Examining the visual characteristics of a 1983 Washington quarter requires a trained eye and an understanding of what separates a genuinely exceptional specimen from the millions of ordinary examples that still circulate today. The obverse portrait of Washington should be scrutinized for the sharpness of detail in the hair above the ear, the definition of the queue or ponytail at the back of the neck, and the crispness of the lettering in Liberty and In God We Trust, because these are the zones where die wear first becomes visible, and where the difference between an early strike and a late strike is most apparent. On the reverse, the eagle's wing feathers, particularly the outermost tips and the smaller feathers along the leading edge of each wing, serve as a critical barometer of strike quality, with fully defined, individually separated feather barbs indicating a coin struck from a fresh, unworn die. The surfaces of an uncirculated 1983 quarter should display a lively, rotating luster that sweeps across the fields as the coin is tilted, and this luster should be unbroken by hairlines, abrasions, or the telltale dullness that develops when a coin has been cleaned or improperly stored. The color should be a bright, uniform silver gray consistent with the copper-nickel-clad composition, and any areas of discoloration, spotting, or unnatural tunning should be regarded with suspicion, as they may indicate environmental damage or, in some cases, artificial enhancement by an unscrupulous seller attempting to disguise a circulated coin as uncirculated. The minting context of the 1983 quarter creates a fascinating paradox that lies at the very heart of its appeal to collectors and investors alike. The combined mintage of quarters from Philadelphia and Denver in 1983 exceeded 1 billion pieces, a figure that would suggest utter commonality, and that, for circulated grades, is entirely accurate. A worn 1983 quarter is worth exactly 25 cents and will likely remain so forever. What transforms this coin from common to coveted is the devastatingly small number of examples that survived in true gem uncirculated condition, a population that has been estimated by some specialists at perhaps a few thousand coins across both mints combined, and possibly far fewer at the highest grade levels. The absence of official mint sets meant that the only uncirculated 1983 quarters that exist today were preserved by accident, a roll set aside by a bank teller who thought it might be interesting someday, a handful of coins purchased from a dealer who happened to order a bag directly from the mint, or a single quarter that somehow found its way into a drawer or envelope and sat undisturbed for 4 decades. Professional grading services have certified remarkably few 1983 quarters at grades above MS-66, and the population at MS-67 and above is so thin that each new submission at those levels represents a genuinely noteworthy event. This condition rarity, born not from low mintage but from the absence of deliberate preservation, is what gives the 1983 quarter its unique character, and what makes every pristine example a small miracle of survival against overwhelming statistical odds. The error and variety landscape of the 1983 quarter is particularly rich and diverse, reflecting the inconsistent production conditions and variable die quality that characterize this era of mint operations. Several distinct double die varieties have been catalogued on both the obverse and reverse, with the most notable obverse examples showing clear separation in the letters of Liberty and the numerals of the date, where a misaligned hubbing impression created a visible secondary image that ranges from a subtle notch on the serifs to a dramatic, fully split letter form that is unmistakable even under low magnification. On the reverse, double die varieties have been identified in the lettering of United States of America and quarter dollar, as well as in the eagle's feathers and the arrows in its left talon, with the strongest examples displaying a clearly visible spread between the primary and secondary images that immediately distinguishes them from ordinary coins. Beyond double dies, collectors have documented instances of filled die errors, where grease or debris obstructed a portion of the die face and produced a coin with missing or partially missing design elements, a dramatic and visually arresting anomaly that is particularly prized when it affects major design features like Washington's portrait or the eagle's body. Off-center strikes, where the planchet was improperly positioned in the striking chamber and the design was impressed shifted relative to the rim, have also been confirmed for this year, as have instances of die breaks that left raised, irregular lines of metal across the coin's surface, each one a permanent record of a fracture that developed in the die during production. The emotional power of the 1983 quarter lies in the stories that surround it, stories of ordinary people who came tantalizingly close to extraordinary discoveries, and in some cases, actually realized them in ways that changed their lives. There is the well-known account within collector circles of a woman in the Midwest who inherited a small collection of coins from her father, a modest assortment of circulated quarters and dimes in a cardboard box, and who nearly discarded the entire collection at a garage sale before a chance conversation with a local coin dealer revealed that one of her 1983 quarters bore a prominent double die variety worth several $1,000s. There is the equally compelling story of a retired postal worker who spent years casually searching through rolls of quarters from his local bank, a hobby he maintained out of idle curiosity rather than any serious expectation of profit, and who one afternoon found a 1983 quarter with a dramatic filled die error that obscured nearly the entire eagle on the reverse. A coin that later certified at MS-65 and sold at auction for a sum that paid for his granddaughter's first year of college tuition. These stories resonate because they are not tales of wealthy collectors purchasing rare coins at prestigious auctions. They are stories of regular people, in regular circumstances, who happened to look closely at something that everyone else ignored and were rewarded in ways they never imagined possible. They are stories of the extraordinary hiding within the ordinary, of fortune favoring the observant, and of the profound truth that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones we are most likely to overlook. The value progression of the 1983 Washington quarter reflects a remarkable range that mirrors the diversity and rarity of its error types and high-grade survivors. Smaller errors, including minor double die varieties or coins with small but visible die breaks in uncirculated condition, have realized between $3,000 and $6,000 in documented collector transactions and auction results, representing the foundation of significant value for this issue. Unusual discoveries, such as filled die errors affecting secondary design elements or coins with distinctive and well-preserved die cracks, have achieved approximately $6,500 in specialized sales, where variety collectors compete for genuinely uncommon specimens. Premium high-grade examples, particularly those certified at MS67 or above with exceptional strike, luster, and eye appeal, have reached around $7,000 at auction, a figure that underscores the genuine condition rarity of this issue despite its enormous original mintage. Significant error coins, including strong double die varieties with clear and dramatic separation in the lettering or major filled die errors obscuring substantial portions of the design, have realized approximately $8,000 in documented auction settings. Exceptional mint state errors, combining high grade with a recognized and dramatic variety, have achieved about $8,600, representing the convergence of condition scarcity and error rarity that creates intense collector competition. Rare misstrikes, including notable off-center strikes or coins with multiple combined anomalies, have reached $9,000 in auction results, where the visual impact and uniqueness of the error drove aggressive bidding among specialists. At the very top of the spectrum, extraordinary documented examples, coins with impeccable provenance, extraordinary visual characteristics, and certification from the most respected grading services, have achieved up to $11,000 in private sales and major auction events, placing them among the most valuable Washington quarters of the clad era. It is essential to understand that these values represent documented auction or collector sales where applicable and are never guaranteed, as the market for rare coins is dynamic and subject to fluctuations driven by condition, certification, demand, and broader economic conditions. Anyone who believes they have identified a potentially valuable 1983 quarter should approach the verification process with patience, precision, and a healthy respect for the complexity of genuine authentication. The first step is to weigh the coin on a calibrated digital scale capable of measuring to at least 1/100th of a gram. A genuine United States quarter should register approximately 5.67 grams, and any significant deviation from this figure may indicate a wrong planchet error, an incomplete planchet, or a counterfeit, each of which carries very different implications for both value and authenticity. Metal composition should be confirmed by examining the edge of the coin for the characteristic copper-colored stripe that identifies a standard copper-nickel clad piece, and any coin that appears to be solid silver or lacks this visible copper layer should be set aside for immediate expert evaluation, as it may represent either a valuable wrong planchet error or an attempt at deception. Strike quality should be assessed by comparing the sharpness of detail in the highest points of the design, Washington's hair, the eagle's wing tips, the central shield, against reference images of known high-grade examples, because the difference between a sharp early die strike and a soft late die strike can mean the difference between a coin worth thousands and one worth a quarter. Rim characteristics should be examined around the entire circumference under magnification, looking for any irregularities in width, height, or texture that might indicate a broad strike, partial collar, or other striking anomaly that could dramatically increase the coin's desirability. Letter doubling should be investigated under at least 7 to 10 times magnification across every inscription on both faces, with particular focus on Liberty, In God We Trust, United States of America, EPLURIBUS UNUM, and quarter dollar, as well as the numerals in the date, since even the most minute trace of a secondary image can elevate this coin from ordinary to extraordinary. Professional authentication by a recognized grading service, such as PCGS or NGC, is absolutely essential before any sale or purchase, because the financial stakes are too high, and the potential for error too great to rely on self-assessment alone. And as you place that 1983 quarter back under the light, having studied every surface and every letter with the care it deserves, consider this. There is another coin, struck in a different year at a different mint, carrying an anomaly so unusual that fewer than 5 examples are known to exist. And the story of how one of them was discovered is so improbable, so perfectly unlikely, that you may never look at a handful of change the same way again. Step 4. The 1972 United States Washington quarter dollar arrives in the world carrying a burden of ordinariness so complete that most people who handle one would never suspect it harbors any secret worth discovering, let alone a secret worth thousands of dollars. Minted during a year when America was wrestling with the winding down of the Vietnam War, the unfolding Watergate scandal, and the final Apollo moon missions, this coin was produced at a time when the nation's attention was directed everywhere except toward its pocket change. The Philadelphia and Denver mints together struck well over 500 million quarters bearing the 1972 date, and these coins entered circulation with the same copper-nickel-clad composition, the same John Flanagan-designed Washington portrait, and the same heraldic eagle reverse that had been in use since 1932. Yet beneath this surface of routine production lies a layer of complexity that only serious numismatists fully understand. The early 1970s were a period when the mint's die-production infrastructure was aging, when master hub designs were being reused far beyond their intended lifespan, and when the cumulative effects of prolonged die use created conditions ripe for the kind of subtle but significant anomalies that collectors now spend years searching to find. The 1972 quarter is not rare in the conventional sense. Circulated examples are abundant and will likely remain so for generations. But the specific combination of historical timing, aging equipment, and inconsistent quality control that characterized its production gave rise to a handful of varieties and errors that stand among the most intriguing and valuable in the entire Washington quarter series. The historical atmosphere surrounding the 1972 quarter adds a dimension of significance that transcends mere numismatic technicality and connects this coin to a pivotal moment in American identity. Richard Nixon was in the midst of a presidency that would soon collapse under the weight of its own secrets. The country was grappling with an energy crisis that would reshape its relationship with oil and the Middle East, and the mint itself was operating under fiscal pressure that led to cost-cutting measures throughout its production pipeline. Die steel was being sourced from suppliers whose quality had become inconsistent, and the hubbing process, where master designs were transferred to working dies, was relying on master hubs that had been in service for years and had accumulated microscopic wear and damage that was then faithfully transferred to every working die, and ultimately, to every coin struck from those dies. This means that certain 1972 quarters carry within their surfaces a literal record of the aging and degradation of the mint's tooling infrastructure, a physical timestamp of a moment when American coinage was being produced by systems that were themselves approaching the end of an era. The following years would see significant upgrades to mint equipment and procedures, making the 1972 issue one of the last products of an older, more analog approach to coin production, and making its anomalies and irregularities genuinely irreplaceable artifacts of a vanishing manufacturing tradition. The visual profile of a 1972 Washington quarter rewards the patient observer with details that completely escape the casual glance, and understanding what to look for can mean the difference between dismissing a coin as worthless and recognizing it as a genuinely significant find. The obverse portrait of Washington should be examined for the integrity of the hair details along the temple and the back of the queue, where the finest lines are the first to disappear as a die wears, and where their presence or absence tells the story of whether a coin was struck early in a die's productive life or near its end. The cheekbone and jaw area should be assessed for smoothness and freedom from the grainy, porous texture that develops when a die has been overused, a texture that collectors call die flow, and that indicates metal was being pushed into microscopic fissures that had developed in the die face. On the reverse, the eagle's breast feathers and the smaller feathers along the inner wing are critical diagnostic zones, with fully detailed, individually distinct barbs signaling a sharp, early die strike and merged, undifferentiated surfaces indicating a tired die that was producing softer, less defined impressions. The luster on an uncirculated 1972 quarter should be bright and sweeping, with a cartwheel effect that rotates cleanly across the fields as the coin moves, and any interruption to this luster, whether from hairlines, contact marks, or areas of rub, immediately diminishes both the grade and the value. The edge reading should be uniform and complete, and the overall color should be a consistent, attractive silver gray that reflects the standard clad composition without any signs of unnatural tunning, spotting, or chemical alteration. The minting realities of 1972 created a set of conditions that make this particular year a genuine treasure trove for variety hunters and error specialists, even though the connection between those conditions and the resulting anomalies has only been fully appreciated by the collecting community in recent years. The Denver Mint, which produced the majority of 1972 quarters bearing the D mint mark, was operating at near capacity throughout the year, pushing dies to their limits and beyond, with some dies producing far more coins than the recommended lifespan before being retired. This extended die usage led to a phenomenon known as progressive die deterioration, where the die face gradually degraded with each successive strike, creating coins that show increasingly dramatic signs of the die's decline, radial flow lines spreading outward from the center, letters that appear to stretch and distort at their edges, and in the most extreme cases, actual die cracks that leave raised ridges of metal on the finished coin. The Philadelphia Mint, producing quarters without a mint mark, experienced its own set of issues related to hub alignment and die preparation, with documented instances of working dies being hubbed at slightly different angles or with insufficient pressure, resulting in coins that display faint but recognizable doubling on various design elements. These production realities mean that a collector examining a 1972 quarter is not merely looking at a mass-produced token of everyday commerce, but is examining a physical record of the specific conditions, pressures, and limitations under which that coin was born, conditions that will never be replicated, and that give each anomalous example a unique and unrepeatable story. The catalog of known errors and varieties for the 1972 quarter is both deeper and more varied than most collectors realize, encompassing a range of anomaly types that each carry their own distinct appeal and value profile. On the obverse, multiple double die varieties have been documented and cataloged by specialists, with the most dramatic showing clear, visible separation in the letters of Liberty and the numerals of the date, where the secondary image is offset enough to create a distinctly split or shelf-like appearance on the serifs and vertical strokes. These doubled dies are believed to have originated from a combination of hub misalignment and the practice of multiple hubbing impressions that was standard at the time, where a working die received 2 or more impressions from the master hub, and any slight movement between impressions produced a doubled image that was then transferred to every coin that die subsequently struck. On the reverse, collectors have identified instances of die cracks that propagate across the eagle's wing and into the surrounding lettering, sometimes forming complex, branching patterns that create a genuinely unique appearance on each affected coin, since no 2 die cracks develop in exactly the same pattern. Filled die errors, where grease or debris accumulated on the die face and prevented full impression of the design onto the planchet, have been documented with varying degrees of severity, from minor missing elements to dramatic examples where entire sections of the eagle or Washington's portrait are absent. Additionally, a small number of off-center strikes have been confirmed, where the planchet was not properly seated in the collar during striking, and the design was impressed shifted relative to the rim, creating a visually arresting piece that immediately stands out from ordinary production. The human stories that surround the 1972 quarter are what elevate it from a mere object of technical interest to something that touches the deepest emotions of hope, regret, and the intoxicating possibility of transformation through a single, unexpected discovery. There is the account, well known in collector forums, of a young man in Pennsylvania who purchased a roll of quarters from a rural bank in the early 2000s for a laundry machine, used most of them without incident, and was about to spend the final few when something about one coin caught his eye, a faint, almost ghostly shadow behind the letters of Liberty, that he initially attributed to a smudge, but that, upon closer inspection under a jeweler's loupe, revealed itself to be a strong and previously uncatalogued double-die variety. That coin, later authenticated and graded, sold for a sum that covered the down payment on his first home, a transformation so sudden and so unexpected that he described the moment of realization as feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Equally poignant are the stories that circulate in the collecting community about the ones that got away. The estate sale, where a jar of old quarters was sold for a few dollars to a dealer who later found a 1972 quarter with a dramatic filled die error worth thousands, the original owner never knowing what they had parted with. These narratives carry a universal emotional resonance because they speak to the fundamental human experience of living in a world where extraordinary value can be concealed within the most ordinary objects, where the difference between wealth and ignorance can hinge on nothing more than taking a second look at something everyone else has already dismissed. The value landscape of the 1972 Washington quarter unfolds across a spectrum that reflects the full range of its error types, condition rarities, and collector demand. And understanding this progression is essential for anyone who hopes to navigate this market with realistic expectations. Minor errors, including small die cracks, faint double die varieties, or coins with light-filled die elements in uncirculated condition, have realized between $900 and $2,000 in documented collector transactions and auction results, representing the accessible entry point into meaningful value for this issue. Unusual misstrikes, such as modest off-center strikes or coins with distinctive rim irregularities, have achieved approximately $3,000 in specialized error auctions, where knowledgeable bidders recognize and compete for genuinely uncommon specimens. Premium high-grade examples, particularly those certified at MS67 or above with exceptional strike sharpness, full luster, and outstanding eye appeal, have reached around $3,500 at auction, a figure that reflects the genuine scarcity of 1972 quarters at this condition level, despite their enormous original mintage. Strong mint-state error coins, combining a recognized and visually dramatic variety with high-grade certification, have realized approximately $5,000 in documented sales, where the convergence of condition and error rarity creates intense competition among serious collectors. Rare misstrikes, including significant off-center examples or coins with multiple combined anomalies, have reached $6,000 in auction settings, where the visual impact and uniqueness of the piece drove aggressive bidding. Extraordinary collector examples, those combining exceptional grade, a dramatic and well-documented variety, and strong provenance, have achieved approximately $6,500 in private sales and major auction events. At the very summit of the market, exceptional or one-of-a-kind documented discoveries, including previously unreported error types or coins with unprecedented combinations of rare attributes, have realized up to $9,000 in the most competitive auction environments, placing them among the most valuable Washington quarters of the clad era. It is critical to emphasize that these figures represent documented auction or private sale results where applicable and are never guaranteed, as the rare coin market is influenced by condition, certification, collector demand, timing, and broader economic forces that can produce significant variation in realized prices. For anyone who suspects they may have found a valuable 1972 quarter, a methodical and thorough examination process is the essential next step before any thought of buying or selling, and this process should be approached with both patience and the right tools. Weight is the foundational diagnostic. A genuine United States quarter should measure approximately 5.67 grams on a properly calibrated digital scale, and any meaningful deviation from this standard may signal a wrong planchet error, an incomplete planchet, or a counterfeit, each of which carries entirely different implications for value and authenticity. Metal composition should be verified by inspecting the edge of the coin for the characteristic copper-colored stripe that identifies a standard copper-nickel clad piece, and the absence of this stripe or the presence of an unexpected metal color should prompt immediate consultation with a qualified expert. Color should be evaluated under natural or full-spectrum lighting, looking for the consistent silver gray of a genuine clad coin. With any unusual golden, brassy, or deeply toned surfaces warranting further investigation for potential environmental damage, or, in rare and valuable cases, a strike on an incorrect planchet. Strike alignment should be confirmed by holding the coin by its edges and rotating it to verify that the obverse and reverse designs are properly oriented relative to each other, as any rotational misalignment could indicate a valuable striking error. Rim characteristics should be examined around the entire circumference under magnification, with attention to any variations in width, height, texture, or the presence of reeding, since broad strikes, partial collar errors, and other rim-related anomalies can dramatically increase a coin's desirability and value. Letter doubling should be investigated under at least 7 to 10 times magnification across every inscription on both faces, with particular attention to Liberty, In God We Trust, United States of America, EPLURIBUSUNUM, and quarter dollar, as well as the numerals in the date, because even the most subtle trace of a secondary image can transform an ordinary quarter into a recognized and financially significant variety. Professional authentication by a respected grading service such as PCGS or NGC is absolutely indispensable before any transaction, as the difference between a genuine premium example and a cleverly altered or counterfeit coin can amount to thousands of dollars, and certified grading provides both protection and marketability that no personal assessment can replicate. If you have enjoyed this journey through the hidden world of the 1972 Washington quarter and want to discover more extraordinary coins that could be sitting in your pocket change right now, subscribe to this channel so you never miss a future episode, because the next remarkable discovery could be waiting in the very next handful of coins you receive. And that is the end of today's video. So until next time, keep looking closely, keep hunting carefully, and never underestimate the treasures that ordinary people overlook every single day. Step 5. The United States Washington quarter dated 1965 is not merely a coin. It is a monument to one of the most dramatic turning points in the entire history of American coinage. A single year that forever changed what money meant in this country, and yet most people who hold one have absolutely no idea they are touching a genuine historical boundary line. On July 23, 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Coinage Act of 1965, legislation that eliminated silver from the quarter dollar and replaced it with a copper-nickel-clad composition, ending a tradition of precious metal coinage that stretched back to the founding of the Republic. The 1965 quarter was the very first Washington quarter struck without silver, the first to bear the new clad sandwich of pure copper core and cupronickel faces, and the first to carry no mint mark at all. A deliberate decision by the Treasury to discourage collectors from hoarding coins during a nationwide coin shortage that had reached crisis proportions. Every single 1965 quarter, whether struck at Philadelphia or Denver or San Francisco, carries no mint mark, making it impossible to determine at a glance which facility produced any individual coin, and this intentional anonymity was designed to keep coins moving through commerce rather than disappearing into collections and vaults. The result is a coin that was born into chaos, conceived during a national emergency, and produced under conditions of extraordinary pressure and urgency that would leave their mark, sometimes literally, on the coins themselves in ways that collectors are still discovering and documenting today. The atmosphere at the United States Mint in 1965 was unlike anything the institution had experienced in peacetime, and understanding this atmosphere is essential to understanding why the 1965 quarter has become such a fertile ground for collectors and error hunters. The nation was in the grip of a severe coin shortage driven by years of silver hoarding, as rising bullion prices made the silver content of circulating coins worth more than their face value, prompting Americans to pull them from circulation by the millions. The mint was under enormous pressure to produce enormous quantities of new clad coins to fill the void, and production lines were running at speeds and volumes that pushed equipment and personnel to their limits. New clad planchets were being fed into presses calibrated for the old silver composition, and the differences in hardness, density, and flow characteristics between silver and clad alloys meant that dies wore differently, struck differently, and occasionally produced results that nobody anticipated. The transition was not seamless. It was messy, rushed, and imperfect, and those imperfections are exactly what collectors now pursue with a passion bordering on obsession. The 1965 quarter is, in a very real sense, a product of national crisis, and the anomalies it carries are artifacts of a moment when the entire American monetary system was being reinvented under pressure. Visually, the 1965 Washington quarter presents a paradox that perfectly encapsulates its transitional nature, because it looks almost identical to the silver quarters that preceded it, while being fundamentally different in composition, weight, and behavior. The obverse carries the same John Flanagan portrait of George Washington that had been in use since 1932. The reverse bears the same heraldic eagle, and the inscriptions are identical to those on every Washington quarter of the preceding 3 decades. Yet the trained eye can detect subtle differences that distinguish a clad 1965 quarter from its silver predecessors. The color tends to be slightly warmer and less brilliant than silver, with a faintly coppery undertone that becomes more visible as the coin tones over time, and the surfaces often display a slightly different luster quality, less frosty and more satiny than the silver issues, with a sheen that can appear almost flat under certain lighting conditions. The edge of a clad quarter reveals the telltale copper stripe that is the most reliable visual indicator of the new composition, a thin band of reddish metal sandwiched between the outer cupronickel layers that is visible when the coin is viewed from the side. For collectors, the visual assessment of a 1965 quarter is not merely about confirming its composition, but about identifying the specific characteristics that separate an ordinary example from an exceptional one, and this requires attention to details so fine that they are invisible without magnification. The condition rarity of the 1965 quarter is one of the most fascinating and counterintuitive aspects of this issue, and it stems directly from the chaotic circumstances of its production and release. Because the mint was focused entirely on producing coins for circulation to address the shortage, virtually no effort was made to set aside pristine examples for collectors. No proof sets were produced in 1965, no uncirculated mint sets were issued, and no special packaging or handling was employed to preserve exceptional specimens. Every 1965 quarter was struck for circulation and released into the channels of commerce as quickly as possible, where they immediately began accumulating the wear, abrasions, and environmental damage that define a coin's life in everyday use. The consequence of this total absence of deliberate preservation is that the number of 1965 quarters surviving in true gem uncirculated condition is shockingly small, far smaller than the mintage figures would suggest, and far smaller than most collectors realize. Professional grading services have certified remarkably few 1965 quarters at grades above MS-66, and the population at MS-67 and above is so thin that each example represents a genuine statistical anomaly, a coin that somehow escaped the fate that befell virtually all of its siblings and survived 4 decades in a state of near-perfect preservation through nothing more than blind luck. The error and variety landscape of the 1965 quarter is uniquely rich because the transitional production conditions created a perfect storm of potential anomalies, and collectors have documented a remarkable range of irregularities that are specific to this year and this moment in minting history. One of the most significant categories involves what specialists call transitional errors, coins that were struck on planchets intended for the old silver composition rather than the new clad composition, or vice versa, because the mint was simultaneously handling both types of planchets during the transition period and occasional mix-ups occurred. A 1965 quarter struck on a silver planchet would weigh approximately 6.25 grams instead of the standard clad weight of 5.67 grams, and it would lack the copper edge stripe, making it immediately distinguishable from a normal clad example and instantly recognizable as a genuinely extraordinary and valuable error. Conversely, a 1965 dated quarter struck on a clad planchet, but with silver die characteristics or other transitional features, represents a different but equally significant category of anomaly. Beyond transitional errors, collectors have documented multiple double die varieties on both the obverse and reverse, with the most dramatic showing clear separation in the letters of Liberty and In God We Trust on the obverse, and in United States of America and Quarter Dollar on the reverse, where the secondary image creates a visible shelf or split in the letter forms that is unmistakable under magnification. Filled die errors, off-center strikes, and die cracks have also been confirmed, each representing a moment when the rushed and pressured production process produced something that deviated from the intended standard. The emotional resonance of the 1965 quarter is perhaps more powerful than that of any other modern Washington quarter, because it carries the weight of a national story as well as the intimate, personal stories of individuals whose lives have been touched by unexpected discoveries connected to this coin. Consider the experience of a retired school teacher in Ohio who had kept a small jar of coins on her kitchen shelf for decades, a collection she had started as a young woman in the mid-1960s when she first noticed the new quarters appearing in change and thought they might be interesting to save. She never examined them carefully, never had them appraised, and eventually forgot about them entirely until a home renovation project brought the jar back into the light. A visiting grandson, curious about the old coins, looked at one through a smartphone camera zoom and noticed that the edge looked different from a normal quarter. No copper stripe, a slightly heavier feel, a subtly different color. That coin turned out to be a 1965 quarter struck on a silver planchet, a transitional error of the type that specialists consider among the most significant and valuable anomalies in modern American coinage, and its authentication and sale transformed the financial situation of a family that had been struggling with medical debt. Stories like this are not legends or exaggerations. They are documented accounts that circulate through the numismatic community, each one a reminder that the 1965 quarter is not just a coin, but a vessel of possibility, an object that can sit unnoticed for half a century before revealing a value that changes everything. The value progression of the 1965 Washington quarter reflects the extraordinary range of its error types and the genuine scarcity of its high-grade survivors, creating a market landscape that spans from modest premiums to truly exceptional sums. Smaller errors, including minor doubled die varieties or coins with small but visible die cracks in uncirculated condition, have realized between $3,000 and $6,000 in documented collector transactions and auction results, representing the foundation of meaningful value for this transitional issue. Unusual discoveries, such as filled die errors affecting secondary design elements or coins with distinctive and well-preserved die deterioration patterns, have achieved approximately $6,500 in specialized sales, where variety collectors seek genuinely uncommon specimens. Premium high-grade examples, particularly those certified at MS67 or above with exceptional strike sharpness, full original luster, and outstanding eye appeal, have reached around $7,000 at auction, a figure that underscores the genuine condition rarity of this issue despite its enormous original mintage. Significant error coins, including strong and visually dramatic double die varieties with clear separation in the lettering, have realized approximately $8,000 in documented auction settings, where the combination of error significance and condition creates intense collector competition. Exceptional mint-state errors, combining high-grade certification with a recognized and dramatic variety, have achieved about $8,600, representing the convergence of condition scarcity and error rarity that drives the most aggressive bidding. Rare misstrikes, including notable off-center strikes or transitional errors on incorrect planchets, have reached $9,000 in auction, results where the visual impact and historical significance of the anomaly produced fervent competition among specialists. At the very top of the spectrum, extraordinary documented examples, coins with impeccable provenance, unprecedented combinations of rare attributes, or transitional errors of the highest significance, have achieved up to $11,000 in private sales and major auction events, placing them among the most valuable Washington quarters of the entire clad era. It is essential to understand that these values represent documented auction or collector sales where applicable and are never guaranteed, as the market for rare coins is dynamic and subject to fluctuations driven by condition, certification, collector demand, and broader economic conditions. For anyone who believes they may have identified a potentially valuable 1965 quarter, a careful and systematic examination is the essential first step, and this process should be approached with both patience and the understanding that genuine rarity is subtle and easily missed. Weight is the single most important diagnostic for this particular issue because of the transitional nature of its production. A standard clad 1965 quarter should weigh approximately 5.67 grams, and any coin that weighs significantly more, particularly around 6.25 grams, may be a silver planchet transitional error of extraordinary significance and value. Metal composition should be confirmed by carefully examining the edge for the copper-colored stripe that identifies a clad coin, and any 1965 quarter that lacks this stripe and appears to be solid silver throughout should be set aside immediately for professional evaluation, as it may represent one of the most sought-after transitional errors in American numismatics. Strike quality should be assessed by examining the finest details of Washington's hair, the eagle's wing feathers, and the central shield elements, comparing them against reference images of known high-grade examples to determine whether the coin was struck from a fresh, early die state or a worn, late-dye state. Rim characteristics should be inspected around the entire circumference under magnification, with attention to any irregularities in width, texture, or the presence and consistency of reading, since broad strikes, partial collar errors, and other rim-related anomalies can substantially increase a coin's desirability and value. Letter doubling should be investigated under at least 7 to 10 times magnification across every inscription on both faces, with particular focus on Liberty, In God We Trust, United States of America, EPLURIBUS UNUM, and quarter dollar, because even the most minute trace of a secondary image can elevate this historically significant coin from ordinary to extraordinary. Professional authentication by a recognized grading service, such as PCGS or NGC, is absolutely indispensable before any sale or purchase, because the financial stakes associated with 1965 quarter errors, particularly transitional planchet errors, are too high, and the potential for misidentification too great to rely on self-assessment alone. And as you hold this coin, this firstborn child of the clad era, turning it slowly and wondering what secrets its surfaces might conceal, consider this. There is another coin from the very next year, struck under equally extraordinary circumstances, carrying an anomaly so rare and so unexpected that, when it was first identified, the grading technician who examined it reportedly sat in stunned silence for several minutes before calling a colleague to confirm what they were seeing.